February 27, 1933. At 9:27 p.m., a massive fire erupts inside the Reichstag, Germany's House of Parliament. Marinus van der Lubbe, a 24-year-old half-blind Dutch communist, is found half-naked behind the building and arrested on sight. After an interrogation and trial, Marinus is beheaded 3 days before his 25th birthday. Historians argue that Gestapo police entered the Reichstag through an underground tunnel and soaked the building with chemicals and gasoline, with Marinus van der Lubbe arriving later to start the fire with his shirt. Later that evening, Adolf Hitler and Hermann Göring meet in front of the flaming debris to round up a list of communists and execute them that same night. The next day, Hitler passed the Reichstag fire decree, which suspended most civil liberties and banned publications considered unfriendly to the Nazi cause. Hitler then takes Nazi control of the German parliament, passes the Enabling Acts, and begins his invasion of neighboring countries, starting with Poland. September 11th, 1941. Ground is broken at the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia, and construction begins. December 7th, 1941. The Imperial Japanese Navy attacks the Pacific Fleet of the United States Navy at Pearl Harbor in Oahu, Hawaii. 2,403 Americans are killed, and an additional 1,178 are wounded. Although Roosevelt received multiple warnings indicating that an attack was imminent, he withholds this information and informs his commanders that negotiations with Japan are underway.
The Pearl Harbor Investigating Committee hears the testimony of Admiral Kimmel, who was Navy head at Pearl Harbor at the time of the Jap sneak attack.
We needed one thing. That vital need was the information available in Washington from the intercepted dispatches, which told when and where Japan would probably strike. I did not get this information.
A number of government investigations concluded that there was considerable foreknowledge of the Japanese plans. Roosevelt declares December 7th an unprovoked and dastardly attack, an act of war between the United States and Japanese Empire, and asks for carte blanche to enter World War II. May 8, 1945. Nazi Germany formally surrenders to the World War II Allied forces. Beginning that month, the United States military begins recruiting the top rocket scientists from Nazi Germany. The project, known as Operation Paperclip, eventually included more than 100 individuals for the purpose of advancing America's technology. July 16, 1945. The Manhattan Project, a joint effort between the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada to develop strategic nuclear weapons, culminates with a detonation in New Mexico, nicknamed the Trinity Test. The detonation was equal to 19 kilotons of TNT and left a crater of radioactive glass 10 feet deep and 1,000 feet wide. A variation of this bomb would later be used on 2 cities. Hiroshima, Japan. 70,000 people are instantly killed as a result. The bomb completely obliterated 1 square mile and started fires across almost 5 square miles, leaving almost nothing at the epicenter. 75% of the city was either heavily damaged or destroyed, and approximately 100,000 people died from radiation poisoning in the years that followed. Nagasaki, Japan. 40,000 are killed and almost 30,000 are injured. The bomb destroyed 1 square mile and started fires almost 2 miles out. In the end, the Manhattan Project cost nearly $2 billion and employed more than 130,000 people at 3 different facilities across 3 different states. Research and design at Los Alamos National Laboratory and 2 sites built explicitly for the project. Uranium enrichment at Oak Ridge in Tennessee, and plutonium enrichment at the Hanford site in Washington State. At the time, it was the largest construction effort in United States history, and the entire operation was supervised by General Leslie Groves of the Army Corps of Engineers. Groves used a practice known as compartmentalization, which limits intelligence to a need-to-know basis and often leaves those working on the project in the dark. Entire communities and natives were literally packed up and moved out. Although tens of thousands of people were directly affected, the Manhattan Project was kept a secret. So secret that Vice President Harry Truman only became aware of it after President Roosevelt's death. General Groves himself claimed, "Compartmentalization of knowledge was the very heart of security. Each man should know everything he needed to know and do his job, and nothing else." To this day, much of the Manhattan Project remains classified. November 21st, 1945. The Nuremberg trials, an international tribunal to convict the Nazi Party of war crimes, commences in Germany. 12 are executed. The rest are imprisoned, acquitted, or commit suicide before trial.
And here is the presidential jet, U.S. Air Force number 1, printed on the side, and the crowd begins its cheer, which you can't hear.
Car is now turning on to Elm Street, and it will be only a matter of minutes before he arrives at the trademark. I was on Simmons Freeway earlier, and even the freeway was jam-packed with spectators waiting their chance to see the president as he made his way towards the trademark. It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route. There's numerous people running up the hill alongside Elm Street, there by the Simmons Freeway. Just a moment, please. Something has happened in the motorcade route. Stand by, please.
The President of the United States is dead.
Swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
August 4th, 1964. 2 American ships report that they are being attacked by North Vietnamese military units in the Gulf of Tonkin off the coast of Vietnam. President Lyndon Baines Johnson immediately declares it an unprovoked attack and orders retaliatory strikes against North Vietnam, asking Congress to authorize action in Southeast Asia. Believing Johnson's claims, legislators act quickly, giving him carte blanche to use military forces in Vietnam. However, documents declassified from the National Security Agency in 2005 confirm that the attack never took place. The Tonkin Gulf Resolution was signed by President Johnson on August 10, 1964. This decree was the doorway through which the United States officially walked into Vietnam.
In March 1968, while on a not very routine mission, a very hard, bitterly fought search and destroy mission in a free fire zone of South Vietnam, a place called Pinkville near Quang Ngai in the northern part of Vietnam, the Army says that a platoon led by a First Lieutenant William L. Kelly Jr., a 26-year-old combat veteran. The Army claims that they murdered 109 Vietnamese villagers, mostly women and children. Kelly doesn't necessarily dispute that fact. What he says is, I was following orders.
September 2000. The Project for a New American Century, a neoconservative think tank whose members include Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, and Jeb Bush, releases their report entitled Rebuilding America's Defenses. The report calls for a massive overhaul of the United States military and encourages fighting and winning multiple theater wars. They declare that the process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor. 17 of the project's participants would later take positions in the next White House administration. Eight years have passed since September 11, 2001. Although the World Trade Center is slowly being rebuilt, the family members and survivors are far from rebuilding the lives which were shattered on that fateful day. The 9/11 Commission, the official investigation into what happened, published its findings and closed its doors 3 years prior. Yet questions still remain in the minds of many. What could drive so many people to continue to question such a tragic event? The events of 9/11 were used to shape the Bush administration's entire foreign and domestic policy. If the details of the events are proven to be a lie, then the authenticity of the Bush administration's entire tenure should be in question. So we're going to take another look at September 11th, beginning with those reportedly responsible for the attacks. By the afternoon of 9/11, Osama bin Laden was officially being blamed for the attacks, though a number of international figures would question the United States version of events, including Egyptian President Mubarak and General Hamid Gul, the former head of Pakistani intelligence, who stated that 9/11 was pulled off by the Israeli intelligence service. On September 16th, bin Laden officially denies responsibility on Al Jazeera television. Regardless, Bush claims he wants bin Laden dead or alive, and the CIA is dispatched to Afghanistan to bring back his head in a box. On December 13, 2001, the Department of Defense releases a videotape allegedly discovered in a house in Afghanistan. Osama bin Laden discusses the attacks, but does not take responsibility. American mainstream media and even President Bush would portray this videotape as absolute proof of his guilt, even though the translation was not conducted by a third party and was instead provided by the Department of Defense. International establishments and many others question the legitimacy of the tape.
Ich habe die Übersetzung des Pentagons sorgfältig überprüft. Diese Übersetzung ist sehr problematisch. Sie ist an den wichtigsten Stellen, die Täterschaft bin Ladens beweisen sollten, nicht identisch mit dem arabischen Ton.
In a video aired on Al Jazeera 3 days before the 2004 presidential election, bin Laden reportedly claims responsibility for 9/11 for the first time. Al Jazeera does not say how they received the tape. The final bin Laden video was released in 2006. Does anyone else see a problem here? Osama bin Laden has never been captured or officially convicted for September 11, 2001. Although audio tapes attributed to him are occasionally released, as of this date, he is considered dead by most. As for the hijackers, the 19 hijackers were painted as radical Muslims, sneaking into the United States without any problem and raising zero suspicion as to what they were planning. First, they were not devout Muslims spending their last days preparing for paradise. In the months and weeks before the attacks, some of the hijackers are spotted several times at strip clubs and make several unexplained trips to Las Vegas. They drink heavily, receive lap dances, buy sex toys, and sleep with prostitutes, spending thousands of dollars within hours. The 9/11 Commission claims that the United States only knew of 3 hijackers prior to the attacks: Nawaf al-Hamzi, Salem al-Hamzi, and Khalid al-Midar. For starters,
Al-Qaeda Collins says he was paid $2,500 a month as an FBI informant in Phoenix. In a stunning disclosure to ABC News, he claims that 3 years before September 11th, he began providing the FBI with information about Hani Hanjour, a young Saudi who later helped fly hijacked American Airlines Flight 77 into the side of the Pentagon.
They knew he lived in Phoenix. They knew his phone number. They knew his address. They knew what he drove. They knew everything there was to know about the guy.
The FBI emphatically denies that Collins provided any information about Hani Hanjour, but they do admit that they paid Collins to monitor the Islamic and Arab communities of Phoenix because of his unusual background. Once in Phoenix in 1996, the FBI asked Collins to focus on a group of young Arab men, many of whom were taking flying lessons. Hani Hanjour was part of the group.
They drank alcohol. They messed around with girls and stuff like that. They all lived in an apartment together, Hani and the others.
Collins said he provided the FBI with basic facts, letting the FBI take it from there.
Two of the hijackers even lived with an FBI informant in San Diego and were visited by Hani Hanjour and Mohammed Atta. Finally, an intelligence unit by the name of Able Danger claimed to have identified Mohammed Atta and 3 other hijackers 2 years before 9/11. The Department of Defense and White House, of course, officially deny it. FBI Director Robert Mueller claimed that the hijackers gave no hint to those around them what they were about. However, this turns out to be far from the truth.
Shortly after Atta arrived in the country, he tried to get the U.S. government to essentially finance his plot, seeking a loan from the Department of Agriculture. Janelle Bryant is the USDA loan officer in Homestead, Florida, who Atta approached in May of 2000. Bryant says it was this television commercial about how to borrow money from the government that led Atta to the USDA office, seeking $650,000 for what he described as crop dusting.
He wanted to finance a twin-engine, 6-passenger aircraft and remove the seats. And he said he was an engineer, and he wanted to build a chemical tank that would fit inside the aircraft.
Bryant turned Atta down, but she spent more than an hour with him, talking, she says, of bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, and targets. She says Atta became fixated with the aerial photo of Washington on her office wall.
He pulled out a wad of cash about that big around and started throwing money on my desk. He wanted that picture really bad. He asked about the Pentagon and the White House and pointed them out.
He asked about the Pentagon?
Yes, sir, he did. In fact, he picked out where the Pentagon was.
Bryant says Atta also asked her about security at the World Trade Center and what she knew of Chicago, Seattle, and Los Angeles.
Hijacker Hamza El-Ghamdi had a flight booked for later on the day of 9/11, and 2 after 9/11, 1 from LA to San Francisco, and 2 within Saudi Arabia. The complexities of the alleged hijackers are far and wide. We can only begin to scratch the surface here. They even managed to find hijacker Satam al-Suqami's passport, perfectly intact, on a sidewalk before the South Tower's collapse. Is it possible that the hijackers were merely patsies in a scheme much larger than themselves or Osama bin Laden?
Be careful where we stay on a loop, because these are being recorded and these tapes will be handed over. Everybody copy that? CC copy. I'm glad I'm not flying today. Don't worry, Jim, we'll carjack you on the way home.
Between September 2000 and June 2001, the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, would send fighter jets to intercept errant aircraft 67 times. Interceptions were routine and usually occur within 10 minutes of a sign of trouble, such as losing radio contact and transponder signal or flying off course. On September 11th, we are told that 4 commercial airliners were off course and out of communication, and not one of them could be intercepted.
Never did in anybody's thought process about how to protect America did we ever think that the evildoers would fly not 1, but 4 commercial aircraft into precious U.S. targets. Never.
Steve, I don't think anybody could have predicted that these people would take an airplane and slam it into the World Trade Center, take another one and slam it into the Pentagon.
Nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government could envision flying airplanes into buildings on such a massive scale.
But that turns out not to be true. U.S. military planners did envision and practice those very scenarios. As reported by USA Today, North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, conducted exercises with fighter jets, simulating hijacked planes flown into the World Trade Center in the 2 years before the attacks. Pentagon planners also envisioned the attack on the Pentagon 5 months before it happened. According to this April 2001 Pentagon email, Air Force officials wanted a war game, having a terrorist group hijack a commercial airline and fly it into the Pentagon. The idea was to check response times to launch fighter jets. But according to the Pentagon email, the plan was ultimately rejected by senior Pentagon officials as too unrealistic. Still to come are questions, big questions, about NORAD's response on the day of the attack. Why, despite all the exercises and the planning, Peter, jet fighters were not in place anywhere near New York or Washington.
Quite an amazing story. Many thanks, Brian. Brian Ross.
One of the drills executed prior to September 11th was called Amalgam Virgo. It was conducted in the beginning of June 2001 and simulated a series of successful terrorist attacks. Its purpose was to focus on unconventional threats like the hijacking of a commercial airliner, which would be crashed into the capital. One part of the exercise involved a Haitian AIDS victim who makes a deal with the Colombian drug cartel to crash a private jet into Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida in order to secure funding for AIDS patients. They even wrote up a suicide note for him. NORAD would deliver scripted messages from the FBI to controllers participating in the war games. And guess who was on the proposal's cover? Osama bin Laden. The second part of the exercise, which was planned before 9/11 but not executed until 2002, involved 2 Delta planes with actual pilots on the flight deck. FBI agents hijacked the planes and diverted them to secure locations. The FBI claims it has no records regarding this exercise. In fact, multiple war games were underway on 9/11 itself. But before we cover those, on the morning of September 11th, President Bush was in Florida to promote an education policy. At approximately 8:30 a.m., he left his hotel and headed for Booker Elementary School in Sarasota. Before entering the building, he was aware a plane had struck one of the Twin Towers. In fact, Bush claimed more than once that he saw the first strike live on television. This is impossible, unless President Bush saw something the public has not. Video of the first strike was not broadcast until later that evening. Minutes after Flight 175 strikes the South Tower, Chief of Staff Andrew Card leans into President Bush's ear, whispering and walking away. And President Bush continues to listen to My Pet Goat. Despite the fact that both Twin Towers had been hit and another plane was in the air and suspected to be hijacked, he remained at the school for a half hour, addressing the nation at 9:30 a.m. How could the Secret Service allow this? President Bush's itinerary had been public knowledge since September 7th. The only way Booker Elementary could not be considered a target was if the Secret Service knew for a fact that it wasn't. With that being said, September 11th was day 2 of Vigilant Guardian, an exercise staged by the Joint Chiefs of Staff and NORAD, which simulated hijacked planes in the northeastern United States. It did so by placing inputs onto the screens of military controllers at the Northeast Air Defense Sector in Rome, New York, known as NEADS. As the attacks unfolded, controllers at NEADS thought that what they were watching was all part of an exercise.
Okay, guys, listen up. Possibly a second hijack. Yep. Second first squawk, and I don't see it.
We have smart terrorists today. They're not giving them a chance to squawk.
What are the chances that a massive hijacking war game begins on the morning of September 11th that cripples the very defense sector in which the attacks take place? Better yet, who made the decision to schedule it on that date? Vigilant Guardian was a branch of Global Guardian, an Armageddon exercise being conducted at Offutt Air Force Base in cooperation with NORAD. Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana also participated in Global Guardian. Instead of returning directly to Washington, D.C., President Bush flew from Booker Elementary to both Barksdale and Offutt Air Force Base before returning to the White House. Another war game Northern Vigilance, moved fighter jets from unknown locations to bases in Canada and Alaska to monitor a fleet of Russian MiGs. 3 F-16s from Andrews Air Force Base, located just 15 miles from the Pentagon, were flown 180 nautical miles away for a training mission in North Carolina, leaving them unable to defend the nation's capital. Langley Air Force Base, which is 130 miles from the Pentagon, would not launch fighter jets until 9:24 a.m., a half hour after the North Towers struck and 10 minutes before the Pentagon. Although Major Kevin Nasipany at NEADS ordered them to fly towards the capital, they are instead sent out to the Atlantic Ocean. When the Pentagon is hit at 9:37, they are 150 miles away, further than when they had started. To top it all off, the National Reconnaissance Office in Virginia, which monitors and controls the nation's satellites, began a drill at 8:45, conducted by a team from the CIA, in which a plane crashes into their headquarters. There are a number of other war games that have yet to be fully disclosed. So, let's review. On the morning of 9/11, the United States military is conducting war games in which fighter jets are flown out of the country, planes are crashed into buildings, and hijacked planes go in and out of radar, leaving military controllers confused regarding whether the events were real or an exercise. What a coincidence.
Okay, and we're trying to locate any information as far as the location where he is currently on mode 3. Do you have any information whatsoever? I do not. Hold on 1 second. Here, so hold on. You heard that, right? Yep. You. Stop. Huh. Come on, New York.
Responding 1063, World Trade Center. Listen, Central, be advised from our location now. I see heavy smoke coming from the building of the World Trade Center. At this time, I'm advising that you send them a...
1 is on the other side of the World Trade Center. Plane number 2. Information headed towards Washington.
Okay, let me tell you this. We were looking, we're also lost American 77.
Okay, 77. Where was he proposed to head, sir?
Excuse me?
Where was he proposed to head, sir?
Okay, he was going to L.A. also.
He was also LA.
Now,
From where, sir?
I think he was from Boston also.
Boston to LA.
Now, let me tell you this story.
9:37 a.m., Arlington, Virginia. American Airlines Flight 77 crashes into the Pentagon, killing 125 people and injuring hundreds more. Pentagon authorities deny that the building had anti-aircraft defenses. The FBI arrives within minutes, and the site is declared a federal crime scene, becoming their exclusive responsibility. The Pentagon initially denies that their cameras captured the crash. However, in March 2002, 5 images are released to the press, though the Department of Defense does not take responsibility for their release. For years, those 5 frames were the only public footage of the Pentagon attack. That changes in October 2004, when Scott Bingham files a Freedom of Information Act requesting videotapes that captured the impact of Flight 77. Special Agent McGuire of the FBI located a CD-ROM that contains copies of 2 recordings made by security cameras, released on March 16, 2006. video taken from a Citgo gas station, which is open only to Pentagon employees, released on September 15th, 2006. And the Doubletree Hotel in Arlington, Virginia, released on December 7th, 2006. As of this date, we still have no clear images of what happened at the Pentagon on the morning of 9/11. The official story goes as such. American Airlines Flight 77 was taken over by 5 hijackers led by Hani Hanjour. Hanjour entered the United States in 1996 to become a professional airline pilot, though he did not complete a single course. On the morning of 9/11, Hani and his 4 accomplices traveled to Dulles International Airport outside Washington, D.C. They had spent the past weeks at the Valencia Motel in Laurel, Maryland, 6 miles from the National Security Agency. All 5 set off metal detectors and are subjected to additional screening. Yet, all of them proceed to board American Airlines Flight 77, which is described by the Washington Post as unusually light on passengers. Out of 188 seats, 64 would be filled. In fact, all 4 planes involved in 9/11 would be at approximately 30% capacity. The hijackers will board alongside Barbara Olson, the wife of Solicitor General Ted Olson, and a number of employees from Boeing, Raytheon, the Department of Defense, Lockheed Martin, American Airlines, the Navy, Army, and other government agencies. The hijackers would have only moments to subdue both pilots, remove them from the cockpit, and retain control of the plane. Flight 77 is allegedly taken over without incident at 8:51. No mayday, no evasive maneuver, no sign of struggle. All commercial pilots are trained to send a 4-digit code, 7500, in the event of a hijacking. We are told that none of the 4 pilots on 9/11 did so. The plane soon after begins turning off course. Flight 77's transponder shuts off, and it disappears completely from radar. Flight 77 allegedly flies completely undetected back to Washington from the Kentucky-Ohio border, reappearing on radar screens at 9:32. Had Hani Hanjour wanted to inflict maximum damage, all he had to do was nose down into the roof of the Pentagon. Instead, he begins a complicated 330-degree turn, dropping 7,000 feet and exposing himself for an extra 3 minutes while executing a maneuver described by experienced pilots as nearly impossible. In essence, an amateur pilot who was unable to control a Cessna in August 2001 executed this nearly impossible maneuver in a 757 with skilled precision a month later. Flight controllers at Dulles International Airport were convinced that the plane was a military aircraft.
Todd Lewis is working radar at Dulles Airport.
One of my colleagues saw a target moving from the northwest to the southeast.
And it was just a countdown, 10 miles west.
And she notified the supervisor.
9 miles west.
But nobody knew that was a commercial flight at the time. Nobody knew that was American 77.
What did you think? It was a military flight of some kind?
I thought it was a military flight. I thought that Langley had scrambled some fighters, and
it was almost a sense of relief. This must be a fighter.
Maybe one of them got up there.
It was really moving fast.
It was moving very fast, like a military aircraft might move at a low altitude.
This must be one of our guys, sent in, scrambled to patrol our capital.
The 757 allegedly descends over a Sheraton Hotel, Navy Annex, and Citgo gas station before crossing Washington Boulevard. 5 light poles are struck and knocked out of the ground. 1 reportedly strikes a taxi. Flight 77 manages to hit the only section which was reinforced to withstand a terrorist attack. Including reinforced steel and blast-resistant windows an 1.5 inches thick. The renovation, planning for which had begun in 1991, was only days away from completion. Ironically, had the plane struck anywhere else, the casualties and damage would have been far greater. An area that normally would have housed up to 5,000 occupants yielded only 125 casualties. The section hit was the headquarters of Naval Operations, Naval Intelligence, and Navy Command Center. Army personnel were also killed, along with a number of accountants and budget analysts. The Arlington County After Action Report states that important budget information was in the damaged area. So what was left of Flight 77? Not much. These pictures were taken before the roof of the Pentagon had collapsed. The Pentagon's outer wall had a hole approximately 20 feet in diameter on the first and second floor, and visible damage 90 feet across the first floor. A Boeing 757 is 155 feet long, 44 feet high, has a 124-foot wingspan and weighs almost 100 tons. And it disappeared into this hole without leaving any substantial wreckage on the outside. There is no visible damage from where the wings or vertical stabilizer would have hit the building. The engines of a 757 are 6 tons each, comprised of both steel and titanium. If they slammed into the building at 500 miles per hour, where are the imprints? Where are the engines themselves? The 757 appears to have completely disappeared into the building. There are numerous parts to a 757 that are virtually indestructible, marked with a specific serial number tied back to the plane. To date, we have not seen a single piece positively identified as Flight 77's. Additionally, there was no impact damage to the lawn, meaning Flight 77 managed to strike the Pentagon while remaining a few feet above the ground. And out of the videos that have been released, none of them clearly depict a Boeing 757. Also, an exit hole inside the Pentagon is not explained by any official report. Despite what might have hit the building, why it was hit is much more important. Norman Mineta was Secretary of Transportation from 2001 to 2006. On the morning of September 11th, when the first plane struck the World Trade Center, Mineta headed to the White House to enter the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, or PEOC. At the May 2003 hearing of the 9/11 Commission, Mineta testified the following.
During the time that the airplane coming in to the Pentagon, there was a young man who would come in and say to the Vice President, the plane is 50 miles out, the plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the Vice President, do the orders still stand? And the Vice President turned and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary?
However, the 9/11 Commission concludes that Dick Cheney did not reach the PEOC until 9:58, more than half an hour later. The Secret Service claims that it has no record of when Dick Cheney entered the bunker. What were the orders? If they were to intercept Flight 77, why was it allowed to strike the Pentagon?
Let's go to the trade tower again, because, John, we now have a... What do we have? We don't...
It looks like a new plume, a new large plume of smoke.
That's the scene at this moment at the World Trade Center. Dan Daler from ABC's Good Morning America is down in the general vicinity. Dan, can you tell us what has just happened?
Yes, Peter, it's Don Daler down here. I'm 4 blocks north of the World Trade Center. The second building that was hit by the plane has just completely collapsed. The entire building has just collapsed, as if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it folded down on itself, and it is not there anymore.
Generally speaking, for a building to collapse in on itself like that, it would seem to indicate that there could have been an explosion, a bomb planted on the ground that would make the building collapse within itself.
10 o'clock Eastern Time this morning, just collapsing on itself. This is a place where thousands of people work. We have no idea what caused this.
Almost looks like one of those planned implosions.
If you wish to bring anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under infrastructure of a building and bring it down.
(9:59), New York City, New York. The South Tower of the World Trade Center collapses to the ground in approximately 10 seconds. 29 minutes later, the North Tower follows suit, collapsing in approximately 10 seconds. Later that evening at 5:20 p.m., World Trade Center Building 7, a 47-story skyscraper 300 feet from the North Tower, suddenly collapses. The official explanation is that falling debris from the North Tower created a series of fatal fires inside the building. If this is true, it would be the third steel-framed skyscraper in history to collapse due to damage and fire. The first two would be the Twin Towers. August 5th, 1970. One New York Plaza, a 50-story office building, burned for over 6 hours between the 32nd and 36th floors. It did not collapse. February 23rd, 1991. One Meridian Plaza, a 38-story skyscraper in Philadelphia, burned for 18 hours across 8 floors. It is later described by officials as the most significant fire of the century. It did not collapse. May 4th, 1988. First Interstate Bank, a 62-story skyscraper in Los Angeles, California, burns for almost 4 hours, destroying 4 floors and damaging a 5th. It was one of the most destructive